that I'm not aware of.
What are you doing at your level? You're not aware of that happening at your level? Because we know that on his first day, President Trump directed U.S. Northern Command to revise its unified command plan to add new planning requirements to combat, and I quote, criminal activities.
Senator Tammy Duckworth, a combat veteran, sharply challenges Secretary Hegseth on his tenure at the Department of Defense, focusing on operational mismanagement, misuse of classified information, and the unprecedented deployment of military forces in American cities. Her questioning emphasizes the erosion of the military's focus on core warfighting missions and critiques the prioritization of political symbolism over operational readiness.
Your failures, Mr. Secretary, since you've taken office has been staggering. You sent classified operational information over Signal to chest thump in front of your wife, who, by the way, has no security clearance, risking service member lives in the process. You blew the $1 billion fight against the Houthis, whom, again, as my colleague says, has no Navy, and yet you lost all of those aircraft. You've created such a hostile command environment that no one wants to serve as your chief of staff or work with you in other senior DoD leadership roles. But what we should all be talking about more than all of this is that you have an unjustified, un-American misuse of the military in American cities, pulling resources and attention away from core missions to the detriment of the country, the warfighters, and yes, the war fighting that you claim to love. I don't know if this is because you are too inexperienced and incompetent to understand the real threats facing our country, or if it's because you are just an unqualified yes man who can't tell the president how to keep Americans safe. You are focusing on renaming basis for Confederate generals. You said just now to Senator King that to a man and to a woman, we would rather be associated with the old Confederate names. Well, I am one of those women. I served at Fort Rucker, Alabama, a base that was named for a traitor who took arms against the United States of America, led troops who killed Americans. It was renamed for Mike Novosel, a Medal of Honor recipient, who in his citation for the Medal of Honor includes that he saved 29 American lives, to include hovering backwards in a helicopter towards an enemy bunker where a wounded American was laying and saved that person, including after being taken fire himself. I know a little something about what it takes to fly a helicopter when you've been hit by enemy fire. That was heroic. I'd rather be associated with Mike Novosel than a failed Confederate traitor. I don't know whether you are inexperienced or too incompetent, but I wonder when you will actually focus on our nation's warfighting mission. We know that California is just a deliberate, systematic, political and dangerous campaign led by you. We should not be using our military to play cops against Americans. General Kane, as chairman, a key part of your job is to coordinate military planning across the joint force. Is the department currently incorporating into any military plans expanding the use of the reserve forces to include the National Guard or active duty troops to support domestic law enforcement, including in other locations in the United States?
Senator, you know, we careful.
No, General.
Well, it's not really a yes or no question, Madam Senator. We plan all kinds of different things.
I think it is a yes or no question.
I'm not aware of anything, but the reason why I'm answering is the tags may be looking at something that I'm not aware of.
What are you doing at your level? You're not aware of that happening at your level? Because we know that on his first day, President Trump directed U.S. Northern Command to revise its unified command plan to add new planning requirements to combat, and I quote, criminal activities. A series of follow-up executive orders continue to redirect DoD priorities to supporting domestic law enforcement, including one in April that tells DoD, and I quote, use national security assets for law and order. In other words, do law enforcement's job. I'd like to enter these executive orders into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Secretary Hegseth, you say you are focused on warfighting and warriors. These are your words. Yet you are diverting untold DoD resources and attention to fundamentally non-military mission of domestic policing. Across the country, we have qualified police officers who are trained for that mission. They know those streets better than the Marines you deploy to Los Angeles, who normally Indo-Pacific. And you recently approved 700 more troops in 3 other states to do admin and logistics works for ICE. You say all of this is valuable training, but I would much rather have our troops do tough, realistic training relevant to high-end combat. Instead of typing in spreadsheets for ICE, they should be conducting live fire maneuver exercises. Instead of patrolling American neighborhoods and standing in front of federal buildings, they should be rehearsing call for fire missions. We have local police who can stand in front of those federal buildings. And the list of distractions goes on. You are encouraging the DoD workforce to go work for DHS in increasing numbers. You're pulling the military away from facing foreign enemies who literally say things like death to America. and you're putting troops with weapons aimed at Americans. Mr. Secretary, let the military get back to its real job. Stop forcing them to do DHSs. And if you want to be DHS Secretary, maybe you can apply for that job when you're fired from this one due to your incompetence.
Senator Duckworth's line of questioning exposes a troubling divergence between the stated mission of the Department of Defense and the current operational priorities under Secretary Hegseth. She juxtaposes the department's traditional focus on defending the nation and projecting power abroad with a pattern of decisions that divert critical military resources to domestic political objectives. By citing the deployment of thousands of National Guard and active duty troops in Los Angeles and additional deployments in other states, Duckworth underscores a fundamental misuse of military personnel, risking readiness and effectiveness for high-end combat missions in favor of executing domestic policing functions that should fall under civilian law enforcement agencies. The senator frames these actions not as isolated mistakes, but as part of a broader pattern of mismanagement and misplaced priorities. She references the diversion of funds and assets in expensive operations abroad, such as the failed campaign against the Houthis, where aircraft losses were significant despite the adversary lacking comparable military capabilities. These operational failures, coupled with decisions to send classified operational information via unsecured channels, illustrate what Duckworth identifies as systemic lapses in judgment, operational security, and professional responsibility at the highest levels of the Pentagon. Duckworth also emphasizes the human consequences of these decisions. By creating a hostile command environment where senior advisors are unwilling to serve or resign, Hegseth is undermining morale and cohesion among both uniformed and civilian personnel. The resulting instability not only compromises effective leadership, but risks endangering service members whose safety depends on disciplined, competent command structures. This pattern is compounded when military leaders are asked to prioritize domestic law enforcement support over mission-critical training, live-fire exercises, and strategic operations against foreign adversaries who continue to explicitly threaten the United States. A central point of critique is Hegseth's focus on symbolic acts, such as restoring Confederate names to military bases, at the expense of honoring those whose heroism embodies the values and sacrifices of the U.S. Armed Forces. Duckworth contrasts the valor of Medal of Honor recipients like Mike Novosel with Confederate figures, highlighting the misalignment between leadership decisions and the ethos of service. She frames this as part of a broader culture within the department where political considerations and personal loyalty are prioritized over operational judgment, strategic planning, and institutional integrity. Moreover, Duckworth situates these critiques within a legal and constitutional framework. The repeated questioning on domestic deployments, adherence to executive orders, and the interaction with federal and state authorities emphasizes the risks posed to civil liberties, democratic norms, and the apolitical stance traditionally expected of the U.S. military. By forcing troops to act in roles typically reserved for civilian law enforcement, Hegseth not only risks operational readiness abroad, but potentially politicizes the military at home, a precedent with far-reaching implications. The exchange ultimately portrays a Department of Defense under strain, where operational missteps, unaccountable leadership, and the politicization of personnel undermine both domestic trust and global credibility. Duckworth's argument is methodical. Leadership failures are not abstract. They directly compromise national security, endanger service members, and weaken the military's capacity to respond to genuine threats. In her view, the core mission of the U.S. military, to prepare, train, and execute combat operations against adversaries, is being sidelined, creating vulnerabilities both abroad and at home. The senator's call for refocusing the department's efforts is as much about restoring competence, discipline, and accountability as it is about defending the nation's strategic interests. This exchange serves as a stark illustration of the consequences when leadership prioritizes political expediency and symbolic gestures over operational integrity, readiness, and the rule of law. Duckworth's critique underscores the necessity of aligning military leadership with its constitutional responsibilities, emphasizing that failure to do so imperils both the lives of service members and the security of the nation itself.